Hello everybody, my name is Professor Ben Wadham and I'm from Flinders University in South Australia. I'm the Director of Open Door Understanding and Supporting Service Personnel and their families. We take largely a social determinants approach to understanding the health and wellbeing of veterans, first responders and their families. Today I'm going to be talking about some research that we've conducted on what we call military institutional abuse, and of course which military sexual assault is definitely part of that. I'll talk a little bit about the Australian context and then describe what I mean by identity wounds. So in Australia we currently have a Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, and one of the key things that has come out of that research, when the predominant way of understanding veteran suicide in Australia has been largely biomedical, largely around mental health, and what we've argued over the years is that we need to equally understand the social health implications. We have a methodology for doing that, which I'll explain. But in short, what the Royal Commission has found, other than the kind of more orthodox knowledge, is that there's a strong sense of a toxic systems and culture environment, both in the Australian Defence Force and Department of Veterans Affairs. Nick Caldis, who is the lead commissioner, has argued here in an opinion piece that whilst many service members have rewarding careers, and we can say also from the people that we've talked to in our research, I'll talk a bit more about that in a second, but we did 67 interviews over 3 years. Even those people that have experienced military institutional abuse or sexual assault still have a strong sense of identification and commitment to service and the institution. So Nick identifies that here, but then he says that what he's uncovered is evidence of a toxic culture where abuse, bullying, and harassment is often not dealt with appropriately, and perpetrators are not held to account. And in some instances, complainants are targeted, leaving them re-traumatized. And that'll be sort of the nub of what I talk about today in terms of identity wounds. Here's some initial data from the SEMPRO, Sexual Misconduct Prevention Response Office, and this is 2022. Our research goes back to the 1950s, but this is 2013 to 2022. The main thing I'd say out of this is that I think that male sexual assault in the military is underreported, and through our interviews, men may have experienced rather intense hazing or brutalisation or bastardisation, but often these practices are heavily sexualised, but they don't necessarily see it as initially sexual assault. They may come to later, but they see it as part of the rough and tumble of being initiated into the military. So we've conducted 2 pieces of research here. As I said, 2018-21 institutional abuse and organisational reform. So we've done a kind of a socio-historical, socio-cultural research into this. 67 interviews, and going back to the history books as well, to 1911, 1913, and then also doing some interviews with stakeholders and a lot of documentary work, looking at all the reviews. It's been about 57 reviews since 1969 around issues of military culture. The second piece of research, which we're conducting now, is on veteran suicide, investigating the social and historical dimensions, and we've produced a report for the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide called Mapping Service and Transition to Self-Harm and Suicidality, which outlines, very quote-driven, but outlines these life history interviews that we do with victims and survivors. And that initial research we did on the institutional abuse is coming out in a book in September under the name Warrior Soldier Brigand. So the methodology we use here is something that we've developed over time. I conduct life history interviews. They can go anywhere from an hour to 3, sometimes a bit longer hours. It's a form of critical incident case study. In the suicide space, we might call it sociological autopsy. Has a strong sense of the social health approach, the determinants, and looks at the 3 areas of service and transition, systems and culture, trauma and well-being. What I think broadly, globally, has been neglected is this focus on systems and culture. So to me, that's the process of enlistment, the military justice system, the health system, and obviously command authority, through the Defence Force Discipline Act, and then in DVA or Department of Veterans Affairs, it's around claims processes largely. So these systems and cultures have a intense and profound effect upon service members. Obviously, we describe the culture in terms of 3 key ideas. Martial, was into warlike, martial masculinities. Fraternal, what the ADF has identified in the past as tribalism, and then that also gets wrapped up in terms such as camaraderie, mateship, and esprit de corps, which are all seen as important for unit cohesion, but can be, particularly in arms corps, extremely prejudicial and exclusive. And then exceptionalism, or thinking that the services are exceptionalist, and we see this really strongly in the officer class particularly, but generally there's that kind of sense that for us all to sleep safely at night, we need strong men to walk the walls, and that sets the military apart from civil society. So obviously we look at this in terms of state, civil society, and military relations. And this exceptionalism generates this military-civil culture gap. So I'll talk about the effects, or a bit of the character of sexual assault for men and women. So first I'll talk about hazing. And here's a quote from someone we called Peter. It's his pseudonym. He served in the late 80s, although I think we could say that hazing and initiations have declined since the 80s and 90s. Still, there are cases of it that we come across, but often they are highly sexualised processes. So in this case, he's on a naval vessel, training vessel, and Peter had a strong sense of social justice, which when he saw other people being bullied and harassed, he spoke up about it. And this brought him unwanted attention, along with several other apprentices. And then their brutalisation involved taking their clothes off and sexually assaulting them. And this became a relatively common action. Hazing and sexual assault, or hazing particularly, has been very strong at... There's quite a strong history of that at the Royal Military College Duntroon. At least that's where the history's been written. But also the Army Apprenticeship School, on some naval ships such as HMAS Narimba, Cerberus, HMAS Lowen, and there's quite a, we've uncovered quite a strong history there of young men being sexually assaulted either by older men and commanders. Some of these men were, 15 at the time. So there's some indications of, pedophilia in the military over the decades, but also through this peer process of initiations and rituals. So when we start to see women moving into the Australian Defence Force in the mid-80s, women become exposed to male cultures. Men had been exposed to these martial cultures for some time. Just a couple of quotes from some two reports there. 94, men have been encouraged in the society we live in to dominate. So this was the first real prominent scandal in the Navy of a female being raped on a ship when the women started to first go on ships. And this is how the report described that male culture. Our analysis in some of our publications is that it was an inadequate report, an inadequate response. And in 97, another report to the Australian Defence Force Academy, which is an extension of, or had become an extension of the Royal Military College Duntrine. They're co-located. ADVA is tri-service but Army dominated. And this was done by the Diversity and Equity Officer at the time, who identified that this culture of masculinity was having a detrimental effect upon women and men. So just a few quotes here to describe some of the experiences of the women. While undergoing officer cadet training at ADFA in 86 to 92, they talk about how the girls were, felt like they were hated, and that the men would be very explicit about that they weren't welcome, and they would engage in innuendo and pornography and all these sorts of kind of practices which set the men apart from the women and denigrated the women. Even later on, from 2003-13, Olivia talks here about how she still had to negotiate these male cultures in her service. Then when this became sort of acknowledged within the services, women were pretty much told that men, this is the way men were, the kind of testosterone, the biological argument, and that women would have to look after themselves, and that men's sexual drive was insatiable, and that women shouldn't do anything in order to attract men's attention. So this goes on to talk about the actual safety of women and what we call rape-prone cultures. Here these quotes talk about the fact that women could be sexually assaulted in front of other men, and that you shouldn't report it or talk back to it because that'll generate problems for the men and for the commanders. And so we have this first assault, the incident of sexual abuse, and then we call it the second assault, and that this really, to me, cut to the core of the veteran identity, and I'll explain that in a later slide. But this idea of betrayal, we call it identity wounds, but that's us sort of elaborating on the idea of moral injury in a collective cultural sense. But you can see here that once women were victims, and if it became public knowledge, then they were had that second assault and were harassed and targeted. So some of the key points out of this research was that male and female sexual assault in the military are different. In our research, men who were hazed or bastardised didn't always register the experience of sexual assault because they were more focused on the experience of the initiation, which they thought was a rite of passage. Women were more subject to predatory men and male martial cultures, and the intensity of misogyny and predation appeared to shift over the decades, but it hadn't disappeared. It still comes through in our research. This initial assault resulted in trauma and betrayal, trauma from the incident, and identity wounds or betrayal from peers and commanders. And the responses by commanders were inadequate, inappropriate, or resistant. So we call this the second assault. We also describe this as administrative violence. It's when the commander uses their command discretion to target and harass. And these identity wounds result from the incident where men and women in different ways had to come to identify intensely with military service, become part of their identity. This is through camaraderie, team focus, and the belief that everyone's watching out for themselves. And then when that was shattered, and then after they reported it and were targeted, this left a really strong sense of betrayal, which in our interviews, which sometimes are 30 years long now, the betrayal seems to last longer and be more deeper than the trauma. So I want to thank you for listening to me, and we'll continue to conduct this research on veteran suicide, in which we see this sort of stuff as quite a significant part of that research. Thank you.